Life Imitates series when the dream becomes a business model. A follow-up to The Triangle Effect, when a nation loses its dream. The American dream once represented a pathway of hope. Education, employment, marriage, homeownership, community involvement, and retirement. But for many people today, that dream no longer feels like a path. It feels like a business model, one where every stage requires payment, approval, access, and survival.
Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking something pretty heavy, but absolutely crucial. What happens when the dream becomes a business model? Since we last talked about the triangle effect, we've got a really eye-opening follow-up here. We're going to look at how the American dream basically morphed from this purposeful life path into a rigid transactional system. It's a lot to process, but I promise, looking at it through this lens, it's going to make so much sense. Okay, so to really grasp the pressure so many of us are feeling today, we kind of need to take a step back and look at our collective memory. There's this quote from the source material. There was a time when the American dream was described as a path. And, think about that for a second. It used to be seen as a functional, structured pathway, not just some vague, abstract idea in the clouds, but a literal sequence of steps that actually gave people clear direction for building a life. Right, so that traditional path, it was pretty straightforward. You had education, employment, marriage, home ownership, getting involved in your community, and then retirement. Now look, we have to be totally honest here. That path was never perfect, okay? It wasn't equally available to everyone, not by a long shot. But there was this foundational societal belief that if you just worked hard, took responsibility, and kept putting one foot in front of the other, you could actually build a stable life following those steps. Well, things have completely shifted. The dream, it's become a transaction. And this is where we really hit the pressure phase of our modern reality. For so many folks out there today, that normal, sequential life path, it's just gone. It's been entirely replaced by a business model. It is no longer just about putting in the effort. It's turned into this massive system that demands constant payment, ongoing approval, and continuous access fees just to stay in the game. So at basically every single stage of life now, the big question isn't, hey, are you willing to work hard? Nope. The question is simply, can you afford to continue? Think about it. Can you afford the education? Can you afford the specialized training? Can you afford the sky-high rent just to live somewhat near your job? And those questions, they just keep piling up. It's like this relentless cascade. Can you afford the medical bill if you get sick? What about the car you literally need to commute, the insurance, the skyrocketing costs of groceries, childcare? I mean, these aren't luxuries, right? These are everyday, bare minimum survival costs. And this rapid-fire, endless financial testing, it creates this overwhelming, suffocating pressure on everyday people who are simply trying to build a foundation. Which brings us to the ultimate, final question. Can you afford to retire? I actually want to pause right there for a second. Just let the emotional weight of that lifelong financial uncertainties sink in. I mean, retirement was supposed to be the finish line, right? The season of rest, your reward for decades of hard labor. But now, for so many, it's just another terrifying conditional question mark. And honestly, this completely changes our fundamental values as a society. We've shifted away from that original, purpose-driven question of, what kind of life are you trying to build, to a cold transactional reality. What can you pay? Because a business model doesn't care about human potential. It doesn't care what unique gifts you have or the family you want to build. It just looks at your income and your credit score. Purpose has literally been replaced by payment. Let's actually break down how this impacts those classic life milestones, because every single step of the dream has gotten drastically harder. Education, it basically begins with crippling debt now. Employment doesn't offer baseline stability anymore. You can work a full-time job and still completely struggle to make ends meet. Marriage gets delayed because of financial panic. Homeownership feels like an absolute pipe dream for the average working person. Community involvement is starving because, frankly, people are just exhausted. And retirement, well, we already talked about that. People are really starting to wake up and realize, hey, maybe this system is actually designed to just extract our labor rather than guarantee our success. And this is exactly why our source material makes such a crucial point. This is not just an economic problem, it is a spiritual, moral, and generational problem. When every single step of your life is turned into a relentless financial test, you stop dreaming freely. You have to start calculating your mere survival. Instead of asking what you're meant to build in this world, the system forces you to look around and ask, what can I afford to lose? And we see this building across the whole society through what the explainer calls the triangle effect. It neutrally maps out how three very distinct generations are going through this exact fracture of the American dream right now. You've got the past, right? They remember the dream as it used to be. Then you have the present, who are currently footing the absolutely exorbitant cost of it. And finally, the future. They are actively standing back and questioning whether this dream is even worth buying into anymore. Because make absolutely no mistake, the younger generation is watching all of this. They see adults working unbelievably hard and still struggling to scrape by. They are watching graduates chained to decades of debt, renters getting completely priced out of their own hometowns, seniors filled with anxiety after a lifetime of labor, and small businesses just fighting to survive, all while massive corporate systems just keep pulling in record profits. They're absorbing every bit of that, which inevitably leads young folks to ask this incredibly profound, devastating question: why continue? I mean, seriously, why continue if higher education just guarantees a lifetime of debt? Why play along if owning a home is permanently out of reach? Why continue if doing all the right things and working hard no longer actually gives you security? And we really have to validate that frustration. As the source notes, that question is not laziness. That question is grief. When young people hesitate to jump into this system, it is not some lack of a work ethic. It's grief. It is the deep, genuine grief of a generation that was told to believe in this beautiful promise, but instead they were just handed an unpayable bill. So, this brings us to the warning phase of this explainer. Because a dream becomes inherently dangerous when it promises opportunity but only ever produces exhaustion. It's dangerous when it rewards pure profit but completely ignores the well-being of actual human beings. And it is incredibly dangerous when it gaslights people into thinking their financial struggles are entirely their own fault, even when the economic conditions were stacked against them from the start. Look, when a system allows those with all the power to just sit back and benefit from the struggle of people simply trying to survive, that is a broken system. Now, I want to be absolutely 100% clear here. Responsibility still matters. Things like discipline, wisdom, hard work, planning, character, these virtues are still completely foundational. We impartially recognize that personal accountability is necessary. But, and this is a massive but, personal responsibility must never be weaponized as an excuse to ignore systemic injustice. You simply cannot look at people and tell them to just work harder while flat out refusing to examine why honest hard work doesn't actually produce stability anymore. So we're kind of forced to ask the really hard, uncomfortable questions here. Who is profiting from the struggle? We have to look at this impartially. Who actually gains a financial advantage when homeownership becomes totally unreachable for normal people? Who benefits when higher education costs a fortune? And perhaps the biggest question, who gains when young people just give up and stop believing in the future altogether? To start answering that, we move into the restoration phase of our explainer, because there are some stark, uncomfortable truths we have to face before we can even think about authentically rebuilding hope. We've got to tell the truth about the reality of the cost of living, the truth about stagnant wages, the housing market, education, debt. We must be brutally honest about who gets opportunity, how our leadership is acting, and what justice really looks like. Because a nation that refuses to ask these hard questions, well, eventually they're going to have to live with the really hard consequences. Restoring that original purposeful pathway, it requires a very specific progression. Step 1, speak the truth about what we have collectively tolerated. Step 2, restore responsibility. And I don't just mean individually, but systemically across the board. And then, step 3, rebuild hope. Because true hope isn't rebuilt by slapping on a smile and pretending everything is fine, and it's definitely not rebuilt by blaming the younger generation. It's rebuilt through deep, uncomfortable honesty and a shared sense of societal responsibility. And what does that shared responsibility actually look like in practice? It means every single segment of society stepping up to the plate. Parents have to teach wisdom. Leaders absolutely must protect people. Teachers need to awaken purpose in their students. Employers have to truly value their workers, not just use them. Churches and local groups need to strengthen their communities. Every single group we see here has to actively choose people over pure profit and actually protect the vulnerable. That is quite literally the only way the stream gets restored. So we're going to wrap up this explainer with one final, incredibly powerful thought. Life imitates what it sees, and the future is watching what we are willing to restore. Honestly, if young people only see greed and exhaustion around them, they're going to surrender to despair. But if they see courage, if they see wisdom and justice, if they watch us actually choose people over profit, they just might believe again. The American dream can become a pathway once more, for sure, but only if we actively choose justice and hope over despair. So the question is, what are we going to show the future? Thank you so much for walking through this explainer with me today. Keep asking those hard questions.